Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, I usually come in at a much smaller venue. And like those much smaller venues, everybody moves to the back for some reason. So just a couple guys in the front were already here and sleeping anyway. So this is what we're going to be talking about. I'm here I'm sure you've seen the CrowdStrike table out front. Go through the mandatory who am I. My name is Harlan Carvey. I've been doing incident response for about 22 years. Currently working with CrowdStrike on the Overwatch team. These are the guys that do the threat hunting. Overwatch is not a SOC. They don't send alerts. They're just threat hunters. So they find bad stuff. And if you're a customer of ours and you receive an email from Overwatch notification, you need to stop, drop, and roll. Okay? That's basically what I do with that team. Is I do the strategic tracking of across all the incidents, across all the campaigns, across the entire customer base. So I see everything. I see all the data. Talking with the guys up here in front, we have access to the actual Splunk data. But more importantly, we do a lot of strategic tracking, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in my presentation today. So that's kind of what we do. If at any point during the presentation you have any questions, feel free to ask. The slides are just placeholders for me. Okay? I know we only have 15 minutes today, but if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I can come back to what's going on with the slides. So we're going to talk about collection bias today. Is everybody familiar with the term collection bias? No. Okay. Collection bias has to do with developing findings, opinions, or whatever the case may be. Most often this comes out as some sort of annual report that you'll see. I'm sure everybody's seen like the FireEye M-Trends report that comes out. TrustWave's got one. CrowdStrike has our global threat report that just came out a little bit ago. Everybody has a different collection bias. They have access to different data. For example, Mandiant. You're familiar with Mandiant? Everybody know who Mandiant is? Now part of FireEye. For the longest time, they focused primarily on nation-state actors. That was their customer base was primarily those that were hit by nation-state actors. At the same time, TrustWave, another company that does incident response, was putting out their annual report. And 90% of their revenue came from PCI investigations, which is the payment card industry, credit card theft stuff. So they have a different collection bias. They're looking at completely different sets of customers, completely different sets of data. Okay, the same thing is true inside those companies. Okay, I'm with Overwatch. I see Falcon telemetry that comes out. The Overwatch analysts, the threat hunters, they focus on the telemetry that comes out from our sensor. We also have an incident response team. Now, the incident response team may respond to customers that don't have the sensor or haven't installed the sensor until after the incident has occurred. Okay, so that's collection bias. I refer to it generally as aperture, but the industry term is collection bias. So when you're looking at things like annual reports that come out and you're wondering why the numbers are different, that's because they're from different data sets. They're looking at different customer bases. They're looking at different time frames. And down at the level I'm at, for example, when I talk about collection bias, we have customers that install the sensor very early on in the process. So they install the sensor. They install it completely across their network. They cover all the endpoints, whether it's Mac, Windows, Linux, whatever the case may be. And as of recently, we've covered mobile, and we have a firmware BIOS sensor as well. But if the customer installs everything across their entire infrastructure, we get complete visibility. But those cases are few and far between. We'll get some customers that have 150,000 endpoints and only install the sensor on 30,000. So I see a lot of notification emails that come out from our threat hunters that say, the threat actor moved laterally within your network. They moved from a device that does not have a sensor. They moved to this system, and from that system, they moved to another system that does not have the sensor. So we have a limited view of the data. And it's also limited on time frame. The threat actor may already be in. They've already accessed the infrastructure, so we've already got initial access. They may have already done credential dumping. They may have likely already established persistence. So we're getting information from a particular series of events from a specific point in time that's not at the beginning of the continuum. Does that make sense to everybody? For those of you that haven't heard of it, I know this is kind of a new idea, but like I said, I use the term aperture. Collection bias is the term that we use in the community. Something I do is event enrichment. What this means is I get a notification email that goes to a customer. I create an event in our tracking software. We use a product called MISP, M-I-S-P. It's a freeware product. It's very, very powerful, very valuable. It allows us to track these events. So what my team does at that point is we start enriching information. We dig a little bit deeper. We look at what were the we look at the notification email, which has the summary of events that occurred, but we look also at the specific command lines that the Falcon telemetry sent back to us, that our threat hunters pulled out of the Splunk data. So what that gives us is a very, very granular view of what was going on. We not only see, for instance, every command line that the bad guy used, we also see the timing. So we can determine, well, wait a minute. Okay, based on this timing, this is not somebody typing. This is actually a batch file that somebody put on, and they're so familiar with exactly what they want to collect that they used a batch file. And the interesting thing about this is based on the timing and the commands and the sequence of commands as well, we may see these same TTPs on another customer, in another geographic region, in another vertical, all over again. But we also see outliers. We also see things that don't happen very often on customers' networks. And in fact, I've got something in one of my slides a little bit later today that when we saw this, we as a company had never seen this in our data. Now, I'm not saying that somebody hadn't heard about this. I'm not saying that another employee in CrowdStrike hadn't seen this when they worked at another company. What I'm saying is that in our data that we had available from all our clients, and we're currently getting, I think, 1.5 trillion events a week, something like that. I think just a couple months ago, they topped out at 1 trillion events. We keep adding customers. So looking at all our data, we had never seen this event before, and you'll see it a little bit later. And I made a bet with one of the guys up front that when I point that slide out, everybody's going to pull out their phone and take a picture of the slide. So, and usually when everybody's down in front, I try to photobomb the picture, but it's really difficult, with everybody sitting up high. Jump. Yeah, well, you know what they say about short white guys, I can't jump. So we'll talk about MITRE ATT&CK a little bit. Who in here is familiar with the MITRE ATT&CK framework? Okay, you're familiar with it. Who uses it? Yes, there we go. Great. Okay, yeah, it's a pretty powerful framework. There's some pretty interesting things that came out. I was actually engaging with the MITRE folks in an event when Adam Pennington said that they were going to come out with a new tactic called Impact. And I was really, really hoping and talking to them about making it not just about destruction, but about modification, non-persistence modification. They didn't pick up on that quite yet, but we still have time. We still have plenty of time to add new techniques to that. But what this means is that with the addition of new techniques and a new tactic altogether, we're now getting more complete coverage to be able to track some of the things that I'm seeing, some of the stuff that I'm seeing in the telemetry, some of the things that people are seeing in, say, carbon black telemetry. They're able to take that and now map it to something rather than just kind of leaving it in their tracking software. We're able to map it to something useful as part of the MITRE ATT&CK framework. I'm going to talk in general about some of the things that we see, generally speaking, and I think the last third of the presentation is going to be a lot of the nuggets that we see, the little one-off things that are really, really interesting, and even why they're interesting. So let's go ahead and get started. There we go. Collection bias. We talked about this a little bit. Overwatch threat hunting against the Falcon sensor telemetry. So that kind of gives you an idea of what our collection bias is. So our collection bias is based on our customers. We don't see everything. Okay, we do take in information from our Intel group, but we're not seeing what the Intel group is seeing because they're open source. So my collection bias is specifically the customers that have the Falcon sensor and those that have deployed it. And I say that specifically, I point that out specifically because there are a number of customers that we have that are doing a proof of concept first, which is a great way to do it. Test it out, see how it works, see what kind of information you're getting back before they commit to pushing out across their entire infrastructure. So even if I were to say, well, and I won't, but even if I were to say this company, this big company is a customer of CrowdStrike, that doesn't mean that they've got the endpoint across their entire infrastructure. So our collection bias might be a little bit limited in that particular case. So the Overwatch team sends the notification emails out, and again, this is not an alert. The alerts go directly to the customer's interface. They see them, they can address them. The alerts are generally higher fidelity. Okay, the threat hunters go out and look for that last 1/10 of 1%. They look for the guys that are trying to hide in the telemetry, actively trying to hide. The key here to understanding about the collection bias is our threat hunters are looking specifically for hands-on keyboard activity. Yes, we do have guys that look for malware, because malware will very often lead, once it gets implanted, will lead to hands-on keyboard activity. But this is what they're looking for is specifically hands-on keyboard activity. Okay, so there may be questions that you have, like for instance, how pervasive was MITRE ATT&CK? I don't know. All I know is that we had a bunch of customers that had preventions turned on and a bunch that didn't. Some suffered none, some suffered a little bit. Customer responses. A lot of times we get very, very good information back from customers. Yes, we network isolated that system. Even we'll have customers that'll give us back information other than, okay, yeah, that was kind of nefarious, but that was a legitimate pen test. We will actually have customers send us back some information that I can then incorporate into my tracking. Okay, so that's usually pretty good. And again, hands-on keyboard activity. The 3 areas that we look at specifically, we have a team that does nation state, we have a team that does e-crime, and we have a team that does testing, like red teaming. The interesting thing about this is, even from my perspective, the first 2 are melding. Have you heard this in the industry? Have you heard that e-crime actors are using TTPs or tactics that are more closely associated with nation state actors and vice versa? Anybody? Anybody awake? This is right after lunch, or not too long after lunch. There's a whole bunch of sugar and cookies and coffee out there. And okay. Wow. You guys are tough today. Yeah, so there's some nation state actors. Dude, what happened? See? Nation state actor. So there's some nation state actors, and there's one specifically that our Intel team tracks that when that team is specifically tasked by their government, they're a nation state actor. But after hours, they're an e-crime actor. Seriously. If you go and read the information at the CrowdStrike website for Wicked Panda and Wicked Spider. Panda is a Chinese Nexus actor. Spider is an e-crime actor. They both begin with Wicked. They're the same team. It literally says that. It's just that when the guys hang up, when they get done and they hang up their keyboards at the end of their work day, what they do after hours is move on to their other nefarious stuff. So that's pretty interesting. All right. I mentioned event enrichment. We take in this notification emails, and I say emails because sometimes it's more than one. Sometimes it's an initial notification email like, hey, you got to go look at this box, followed up within a couple of hours with, hey, here's some more detailed information. We went back, we looked at the TTPs, we looked at other systems, we looked at the account that was being used. These notification emails are very, very detailed. They got time, accounts, systems, IP addresses, whether there was a sensor on the box or not, so that whoever gets the email has something that they can use to respond with. And then usually within an hour or two, maybe 4 hours, you might get something that's more comprehensive. Somebody will say, hey, we went back and did a retrospective analysis of your data. We were able to get further information. So we start with the notification emails. We look at things like what vertical is the customer in? Because that's what happens out. That's what we see happening. We'll go to a customer site, and let's say the customer is a banking client. They're into banking. And what is the question that they'll ask, do you think? Anybody? What's that? Exactly. They'll say, well, who's going to attack us? Have any other banks been attacked? And if so, what were they targeted with? What were the TTPs? What do we need to look for? Well, it's not that simple. It's not that straightforward. Okay, we'll also look at geographical region. When I was at SecureWorks a number of years ago, one summer I was working on an event or an incident response. We had a guy in Australia, different geographic region, working on another customer in a completely different vertical, in a different time zone, identical TTPs. So the same threat actor group was literally attacking 2 different customers of SecureWorks at the same time. Different vertical, different geographic region, so different politics involved. And that's partially why we track the geographic region. All of our stuff is tracked based on dates and timestamps. Having an intelligence view into the geographic region might add some flavor to the tracking. Operating systems affected. Like I said, we have sensors for the Mac, Linux, and Windows systems. And so we track that. We're able to tell, like for instance in the Global Threat Report, what percentage of attacks occurred against Linux systems. And then we can drill down even further and show what those attacks were. Okay? Attribution confidence. Does everybody know what this means? Some people are nodding their heads. Other people are still kind of asleep. So basically, if we're going to attribute this to a threat actor group, we also assign, or let's put it this way, I don't assign, I get from the Intel team how confident they are in that attribution. Say it's Is anybody familiar with the names of the groups that CrowdStrike tracks? Anybody? Okay, so only one. So let's say something is attributed to Stardust Kalima. What's Kalima? What's the nexus for Kalima? Yes, sir. So let's say something is attributed to Stardust Kalima that's based out of North Korea. We also make sure that we track the level of confidence. The Intel guy will say, well, we have medium confidence. Or no way, guy, this is high confidence. We know for sure. We keep that information with the event. It's historical. It stays with the event itself. Okay? Then we do MITRE ATT&CK mapping. And this is always very interesting. If anybody knows anything about the MITRE ATT&CK mapping, you can take a lot of these different events, give it, and this is true. This is true even for the MITRE folks. Because Katie Nichols and Adam Pennington have said the same thing on their team. Okay? You'll give two analysts the same set of events and come up with a slightly different mapping from each one, just from matter of perspective. Okay? So we incorporate that. That information is ultimately rolled up into our semi-annual reports. It's rolled up into our global threat report at the end of the year. I'll show you a graphic of that. In fact, it's coming up next. So this is a slide. This is actually taken directly out of our last global threat report. So you'll notice there's only 11 tactics because the report was published back at the beginning of the year. Okay, what this means, this is a heat map, and what this means is those that are darker, those techniques that are darker, are higher prevalence. That means we see them more often. Okay, looking at across all the attacks that occur, I think there were 280 campaigns that we tracked in 2018, and across all of them, that's what the prevalence looks like. So you'll see some are kind of light, some don't appear to be highlighted at all, but then you see all the way up at the top there under execution, command line interface. I think with very high confidence, I think that we actually tracked command line interface on every single one of the 280 campaigns. We see it all the time. Now, because we track other systems other than Windows, we don't always see PowerShell, but we see a lot of PowerShell. We see a lot of different types of obfuscation under defensive agent. But you also notice down here at the bottom, and I even have trouble reading it, valid accounts is pretty high prevalence in the different techniques. And this is a artifact of how the MITRE ATT&CK framework is set up. If I click on valid accounts in the initial access tactic, it's automatically populated across the other tactics that the valid accounts technique appears in. Okay, so that's a little bit skewed, but the fact of the matter is this lets us, when we talk to clients, this gives a visual representation that lets us answer the question for clients, I have limited resources, what do I focus on? Okay, so from this, you can see the most prevalent thing is command line interface. So when a customer comes to us and says, well, what should I really be focusing on? Can you detect or can you get information about the command lines executed on your systems? That's where you need to start. Because that's the most prevalent thing. Everything else comes from that. Okay? With valid accounts, let's take that one. Can you track the use of accounts across your infrastructure? Can you tell when Harlan logs in from his console as an administrator versus when my account hits the VPN coming from Malaysia at 2 o'clock in the morning? Can you track that? Are you able to do that? That's kind of a rhetorical question, but when you ask that in a customer meeting, a lot of times you'll see the wheels spinning. And sometimes you'll even see smoke. So as an incident responder, I've often asked the question, can you see these things? And then I'll say, show me the logs, and that's when nobody in the room moves. So if we had more time, I would share stories with you about about some of the. I often thought that for incident responders, at some of these big conferences, like maybe RVAsec would be a great way to start. They should just have like an open mic comedy night, like after hours, have a open bar, or maybe not even an open bar, but just have an open mic and let people come down and tell stories about the things that they've seen in incident response. Anyway, so things that we see, 3 things. Actors modifying the infrastructure. This is important because one of the things I do at CrowdStrike is I give the threat hunting workshops. And this is for prospects and clients to attend. But one thing that always strikes me is that a large majority, and I only say large majority because I don't think everybody raises their hands appropriately. when I ask the question, is this about malware? A lot of people go, yeah, of course it is. No, it's not about malware. What we're talking about here, it's gone beyond malware. Anybody remember something called Sub 7? Anybody see Sub 7? That little thing that you play with somebody, you'd open up their coffee cup holder on their desktop. Remember that? They would just sit there and you'd open up, they just put their coffee cup on it. You remember that? It's really the CD-ROM tray? Okay. So it's not about the malware. What we're talking about here is somebody who's inside your network, wants to stay in your network, and to do so is going to modify your network to suit their needs. They're going to modify your infrastructure to suit their needs. So we see this a lot. Okay, this stands out. Actor reactions. Actor reactions to what? Well, the Falcon sensor and many other EDR tools, I just mentioned the Falcon sensor because I'm from CrowdStrike, but many other EDR tools are capable of blocking activity depending on the configuration. So if they see some activity going on, like a certain command is typed, it could say, well, this is bad across the board, or let's say the customer has designated it as bad. We're just going to block it from happening. Okay? What I like to look at is what is the adversary's reaction when we do that. We're going to talk about that a little bit. And the third one is situational awareness. So what do you think that means? Anybody? I hear somebody? Context awareness? What this means is while we're watching them, guarantee you they're watching us. And we see it. We see it all the time. I got a couple of command lines that you all love. Actors modifying the infrastructure. I've seen them disable the Windows firewall. And there's the command line they used to do it. I took this right out of the telemetry. Disable the firewall. Just turn it off. A lot of times I see this as part of troubleshooting. They're trying to connect to something. They're like, okay, I can ping it, but I can't connect to it. I don't have control of the firewall like the network firewall, but maybe what I see, here we go. See, I can't, like that, I can't do it. I try, I just can't do it. Disable user account control. This is right out of the registry. Okay, I've written a couple books on registry analysis, and this is cool. This is the bad guy going in and saying, I want to execute something on your systems. I'm going to configure the system that you own so that I can use it. Does that freak anybody out? Anybody seen Deadpool? Who's wearing the brown pants? Right? Okay. That right there, the first one, yeah, okay, fine, Windows firewall. The second one, somebody's, and believe me, there's more to come. If you're not wearing the brown pants, you're going to wish you were. Modify system binaries. I've got data. Kid you not. I've got telemetry that shows the bad guy came in, brought a zipped archive, a BZ2 archive with him, unarchived it, deleted the original archive. He left the files on the system. He recompiled SSH and SSHD. Recompiled on the system. We see CC1 and GCC running. We can see it. And all with timestamps, so we know the order this occurred in. We went and looked at the files that were extracted from the archive. They were new functions. Basically, whenever a user used SSH as a client, it recorded the system they connected to and their credentials. When somebody connected to SSHD, it recorded their credentials and where they came from. We've just established credential theft for lateral movement, like all over. And SSHD had a magic key compiled into it. If you knew that password, you could log into SSHD and be running as root on that system. Okay. Anybody need the brown pants? This actually happens. Bad guys are modifying infrastructures to meet their needs. Let's see, what else we got up here? This is a great one. The top one. Anybody know what that value does? Use logon credential? And this goes way back to the early days of incident response when people would argue like on the internet. This is before Twitter. But they would argue, no, it's a bug. And somebody would come back and say, no, it's a function. This is a function. You know what the first value does, that registry value? The key is wdigest. The value is use logon credential. If I set it to 1, what does it do? What? Yes. No. Close. You're close, but no. Anybody? It tells the operating system to store credentials in memory in plain text. Yes. So yeah, you can run Mimikatz, you can run all your tools and get the plain text credentials. So again, this is a registry value that tells the operating system to do something, and we see actors do it. So if you go look across your infrastructure right now, maybe not right now, after you go home changing the brown pants, go look across your infrastructure, tell me well, don't tell me. Look at every system that has use logon credentials set to 1. Look at all of those that have it set to 0 and try to find out why it was in the registry at all. Okay, this is what we call high fidelity indicator. Because I've only ever seen the bad guys use it, and maybe once or twice for testing. Like some guy wants to try, I heard about something on the interwebs, on the intertubes, and I want to try it. Okay, very rarely is that the case. Everybody that I've seen have this value set to 1 has been compromised. Okay, again, but remember, that's collection bias. Okay. Okay, the next one, remote UAC restrictions. I want to do something on your box, so I'm going to configure your box so that I can do something on it. Something bad. I'm going to change the environment to suit my needs. And they do this. Disable machine account password changes. I honestly don't know why. I've only seen this once. This is an outlier, and I really don't know why this was done. But the explanation from Microsoft was it disables machine account password changes on the workstation. And it sounded cool to the marketing people. But again, I have never seen it again, and I don't know why it was done. So how are we doing on time? We're doing good? Yeah. Okay, actor reactions. What happens when a Falcon sensor blocks what an actor does? We've seen a whole slew of things. Now, understand that it doesn't always take the Falcon sensor to stop the bad guy. Sometimes the bad guy stops the bad guy. Okay? My wife calls me a linear thinker. I've been called Captain Pedantic. I'm one of those grammar Nazis on the internet, because if you didn't spell it right, it's not the right word. And guess what? I see the bad guys misspelling stuff all the time. I watched a bad guy struggle to type VER into the command line to find out what version of Windows he was on. 4 times before he got it right. 4 times. That's 3 times more than it should have been. I saw him try to set a registry key with registry value with regadd. The first time he typed it in, the entire command line, you got all those backwhacks, he put 1 pipe symbol in the first time, so it didn't work. Second time, he put 4 pipe symbols in, like that was going to change anything. I just watched him keep going. So sometimes it doesn't take the Falcon sensor or any other EDR tool to stop the bad guy. Sometimes the bad guy's tripping over himself. Okay, I've seen where somebody's on a customer system on the East Coast on the USA and tries to set a scheduled task on a system that's in the UK. So what they'll do is they'll say, launch the task 4 minutes from now, but they'll give the time, and then they'll keep checking, and the task never runs while they check, because they don't understand the time zones. Okay? So sometimes it doesn't take the bad guy to stop the bad guy, but sometimes it does. So what I've been looking at specifically is, how does the bad guy react? We've seen all sorts of things, like keep trying and finally give up, go away. I don't really have any numbers as far as the percentage goes, but I've also seen bad guys like wipe out Windows Defender. I can't do what I want to do, so I'm going to wipe out Windows Defender. One customer environment, within the space of about 20 minutes, we saw him hit one system. He couldn't do what he wanted to do. It involved PowerShell. He disabled and then uninstalled Windows Defender. The next system that he hit, he tried to uninstall something called ESET. Okay, why is that important? I don't know, because I don't know if ESET was installed on that system. Okay, the third system, before he gave up, he ran a batch file that used MSI exec to uninstall 24 security products by GUID. I looked up all 24, figured I had some time on my hands. I looked up all 24 GUIDs. They were all McAfee products. I don't even know if McAfee was installed on that system. Okay, but this guy is trying to do fine surgery with a sledgehammer. But that's not always the case. Sometimes they give up, sometimes they troubleshoot, sometimes they just move to another system, and fortunately for us and the customer, we have a Falcon sensor on that system, so we see it. And it's really fascinating to watch the trials and tribulations of some of these guys. And you know what? I've been doing this long enough. I'm not going to call anybody a script kiddie. I'm not going to call anybody unsophisticated. I was doing an incident response once where the bad guy left all of his batch files that he used to collect server names. He left the batch files he used to push Mimikatz out to all the identified servers, bring everything back. He left the credentials that he collected. We had complete lists of everything. And somebody said during the meeting, this guy really isn't all that sophisticated. He didn't put a password on the archive, left his batch files. And I responded, well, that happened 8 months ago. We were just called in last week. How sophisticated do you have to be? Okay? So, and disable security tools and antivirus. This is actually one of the MITRE defense evasion techniques, disable security tools. But we see this happening a lot. And again, this goes back to aperture and collection bias. When I see an actor remove a tool, I'm not assuming that the tool's on the system, especially when they take a shotgun approach or like a heavy automatic machine gun approach to it. You would think that they would just like, okay, I'm going to get rid of Windows Defender, because Windows Defender is pretty much on all Windows systems, modern Windows systems, right? But why take out, like, why try to remove 24 McAfee products if you didn't even do a query to find out if McAfee's installed on the system? So we see a lot of different reactions. Actor reactions, MSI exec, that's what the command line looks like. I just put GUID in there, and just imagine that 24 times in a batch file. Okay, and I know it was a batch file because, again, I've got the Falcon telemetry. I see the timing. Nobody types that fast, especially that guy that was trying to type VER over and over again. He definitely does. We see SC stop. Now what are the commonalities on the far left-hand side of the screen here? What are the commonalities with all these commands? Built-in tools. This isn't something the bad guy brought with him. This was on the installation CD. The bad guy doesn't need to bring tools with him. He just uses what's on the CD. There's a lot of stuff that I see. Wow, I've never heard of that. I go to my Windows 10 system. Oh, holy smokes, there it is. It's legit. I had no idea. But netstop, service control manager, sc.exe, task kill, turn stuff off. It's right there. Okay. All of these commands turn off Windows Defender. They're all the same. They all do the same thing. But these, again, I didn't type these up from Microsoft Documents. I did, because I'm not a really bright guy, I copied and pasted this right out of the Falcon telemetry. Situational awareness, this is good. Limited situational awareness of EDR solutions. Again, that is a command line. I saw a bad guy go to a bunch of systems, and he was moving around internally via RDP. Type this command, the first command they typed in. Literally, you saw all the login stuff that occurs with RDP in the telemetry. You know, all the stuff booting up and starting. And then the first thing he did was open a command prompt and type that command. He was wondering, is Carbon Black installed on this system? Let's see what else. PowerShell gets, looking for Cylance. Just last week, we actually saw somebody in a customer's environment moving around via RDP, and they went to about 13 different systems, only 4 of which had the Falcon sensor installed. The first thing that they did for those systems that we could see was type task list and then log out. So what do you think they were doing? What's that? Research, mapping blind spots. Research is kind of a cool way to say it. Mapping reconnaissance and mapping blind spots, that has like intent behind it, doesn't it? Right, preparation. How much malware does that? You ever seen malware do that? And I say this because when I was at SecureWorks back in 2016, I did some of the first public reporting on SIMOS ransomware. And one of the guys in the IR team did some more. And what struck me ever since then is a lot of media will come out and say, well, the ransomware looks for vulnerable systems and looks for servers. No, it doesn't. And this is what is wrong, I think, in the industry, is there's not an understanding. This is not a piece of software that does one thing and does it very well, or does a series of things in a process flow with flow control. It's not that. This is a person. Okay? We just talked about adversary reactions and situational awareness. What I'm trying to impress on you is these are people. These are people that can clearly get fatigued and forget how to type VER, but these are also people that can react. These are also people that come with them a set of conceptions and preconceptions. They're looking for things. We have to deal with it. Thanks for that. So the nuggets, this is kind of the cool part. Credential access. Anybody know what the first command line is? Mimikatz, how do you know? I see it every day. Wait, hold on, it says p.exe. What's up with that? Yeah, I can name it whatever I want, okay? But look at the command line. That's something we see a lot of. When I was at SecureWorks, we would just go type, do a search across the MSS data for whatever, that first one, on the second line. We would look for that, because that was guaranteed to show us everybody that had that command line, okay? But you can also run it through PowerShell, like the one in the middle. I told you people were going to take pictures of this stuff, didn't I? Okay? That's how you run it through. That's a way to run through PowerShell. That one was probably testing. But the fact of the matter is the bad guys use the same sites. Okay? Then we have the PowerShell on the bottom. Different command line, looking for different things. Okay? The one on top is the one that we saw. The one that we had never seen in all of our data. Yeah, a lot of guys in the Intel team said, yeah, I've seen it before in their research. People from other IR teams that came to our organization from other teams said, yeah, we've seen it before. Looking at our collection bias, looking across the aperture that we had with all of the historic information we had and all of the Falcon telemetry and Splunk that we had, we'd never seen that before. That was new to us as of this year, or actually December of last year. Okay? So not only did they change the name, but they recompiled the binary to shorten the command line arguments. That breaks the really brittle detections. Okay, we've already progressed beyond the Mimikatz. You know, I did an instant response for a customer once that got hit by Mimikatz. And the sensor that we were using at that particular time, one of the things it would fire off on was the word Mimikatz anywhere in the command line, which is kind of weird. And then while we're working, one of the system administrators running Tanium kept doing searches for Mimikatz. So what was happening was the SOC in Romania would send an alert to the SOC manager in the office behind me, who was like a 7-foot-tall CrossFit Reebok champion guy. And he would get upset. And I'd have to go over and talk to the little guy and say, please stop typing that Tanium search, because it's making the big guy upset. Okay? Then we have, this is another one I've seen. Another Mimikatz. Another Mimikatz with the command line shortened even further. Now, this one we've seen since 2014. Okay, we have data that goes back to 2014 for the last one. The one on top we had not seen until December of last year, and we haven't seen it since then either. Some other nuggets. SolarWinds. SolarWinds remote management. I did my master's thesis using SNMP. I'm a little bit familiar with SolarWinds. I've actually seen a bad guy use the SolarWinds console to move laterally within the infrastructure. Bless you, sir. Use of an AppInit DLLs for persistence. Anybody know what that does? Another feature from Microsoft. Basically, anything you have listed under this registry key gets loaded every time you run a GUI. So what's a GUI? Notepad, Word, everything you use on a daily basis. Use of MSI exec/X to uninstall products. Oh, here's a good one. Use of CHCP. Anybody know what that is? Yeah, you know where I found the reference? In a book on DOS 2.0. Really? Yeah, changes the code page. Who needs to change the code page? Who does that? No, really, seriously, I do all, no, I don't. But who does that? Who would need to do that? Let's see, somebody that's not a native, say, if the system's in an American company, not a native English speaker, and needs to be able to see what they're doing, kind of like when you put a password in, you have a little checkbox that says show password while you're typing it, kind of like that. Changing the code page. And on Linux, enumerating Ruby after _cd hooks for persistence. I didn't want to keep it just straight to Windows. I wanted to show you some of the things that we've seen on Linux as well. Don't worry, we're almost there. Okay. Exfiltration. Who here has seen data actually, not assuming, but actually seeing data leaving a network or having left a network. Anybody? Maybe some. I've actually seen the data. What I've seen is, I haven't seen it like network-wise. I've seen an adversary move the archives to a web server and then query them from the outside. Another one that I've actually seen like the data showing is bad guys on the inside accesses OA from the inside using legitimate credentials, creates a draft email, attaches the file he wants to exfiltrate to the email, then comes in from the outside, accesses the account, which doesn't have 2FA or MFA on it, accesses the account, downloads the attachment, deletes the email. There's no record of an email ever going out. Who's got their brown pants on now? Okay, full command line. This is a full command line. Yes, the yellow stuff is, the name is redacted. I highlighted the yellow because that's exactly what was typed in. That's the password. Okay, and I obfuscated the IP address because A.B.C is not an IP address, but this is a full command line. What did they do? They created and ran an FTP script in a full command line. Who knew that there was an ftp.exe on a Windows system? And who knew you could control it through the use of a script? This guy right here. On Linux, I've actually seen this very recently, like in the last month, the use of netcat to pipe information off the system. Yes, I played with netcat back in the day. I transferred information between systems using netcat, but here's somebody actually doing it. I did it back when, like, 1999, so 20 years ago, and here's somebody who did it just like in the last month. What's that? Okay, great. I haven't really touched it. I don't really have a need to do it, but on Linux systems, we see it a lot. Oddly enough, for whatever reason, I don't see the bad guys bringing it. A lot of the Linux systems they hit seem to have it on it. Okay, time to use for vulnerabilities. Okay, for when I first started at CrowdStrike, the time to use statistic we had was 48 hours. It was called Twitter to use. 24 hours or 48 hours between the time a vulnerability was announced on Twitter and to the time we actually saw it being used. Earlier this year, that was reduced, cut in half. There's a CVE article, I think, on a Jenkins vulnerability was disclosed on February 11th. We actually saw it being used just over 24 hours later. Any questions? Anybody afraid to get up? You don't want to be. What's that? You know what? I should probably just stop what I'm doing and just start selling brown pants. I probably should. Does this impact anybody? Is this like? It's pretty what? Easy? Oh, it's too easy. Yeah, it's too easy. A lot of this stuff is like too easy when you see it being done. Like who knows I just did a mapping, an attack mapping for a IR engagement where the malware that got in initially, what it would do is it would take a copy of bitsadmin.exe, move it to the user's temp directory with an obfuscated name. So that's masquerading under the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And then it had command lines within the macro itself that would pull data down from specific sites. So you want to see what those macros are. You can also check the bitsadmin client event log to see what they were. But what's interesting is I don't see anybody reporting that it's actually used to exfiltrate data. Who knew you could exfiltrate data using bitsadmin? You don't need the brown pants. 2, you don't need the brown pants. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. So again, we're talking about dedicated individuals who are getting into networks, who are modifying infrastructures to suit their needs. They're remodeling your home while you're living in it, and they've moved in. And they're doing this to get what they want. All right, any other questions? Anybody? I'm going to make you stay till the end. No. Anyway, thank you very much for your time today, folks. Have a great time.